So as a designer, I've heard so many phrases like less is more, good design is invisible, as little design as possible, and that good design is obvious, but great design is transparent. None of these things are true statements. They're all like valuable pieces of advice, specifically at the time that they were given. Less is more was kind of popularized by Mies van der Rohe, I think around like the 1920s to 30s. And it kind of made sense back then. They were coming off the Industrial Revolution, or the second one, and they were trying to figure out what the design industry should do to handle all this new capability from the modernization of manufacturing, fabrication, and construction. And so it was about this moment where the design and creative skills needed to adapt to how the field had changed in the form of fabrication capabilities. Now, the reason I've been thinking about this is I recently shared my friend's Hans Lorei, who you guys all follow on Instagram, really phenomenal guy that gives these great little video essays on design, particularly in the home design context. He has a video series which I really enjoy called Good Design Should Make You a Little Nervous. And I shared one of his videos, and the response I got a lot of DMs. And it was people saying things like, good design is invisible, or less is more. And they were acting as if like it was almost like some sort of gotcha moment where it's like, this can't be true because these words don't match these words. And it made me sort of think that like these people are taking things like way too literally. Like these simple phrases are not truth. If words could be translated into design, AI would be good at design. It's not, because it doesn't work that way. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about some of these terms, put a little context on them, and why I think they get so many people sort of hung up and make them, I think they can actually make creatives a little bit indecisive when they keep remembering these proverbs of creativity and trying to apply them when they might not actually be helpful. So first of all, anytime someone gives you a simplistic phrase, whether it's in cooking, whether it's in fitness, you should evaluate. If it's helpful for you trying to accomplish a specific goal, use that as a prompt to move in the direction of that. But it's not true that you should always add more salt or less salt to a dish. It's not always true that you should go spicier or less spicier. It's just something to think about, particularly if you have a tendency to typically over or underdo it in one particular way. The reason why I think Hans's videos are so popular and they're kind of resonating in this moment is that because a lot of people have been swayed by less is more for almost 100 years now. And the result of that is a manufactured environment that feels a little bland or a little tasteless or a little bit, shall I say, too less and not enough more. And so what he's saying at this particular moment seems to be resonating because people are feeling, when it comes to their home environments, that everything's a little bit too beige and subtle and tasteless and has no personality or identity. It's just the byproduct of Wayfair and IKEA interpreting different design trends, picking colorways that are appropriate at that moment, and then everything being sort of mass produced. If you notice, like a lot of his advice centers around placing personal objects in the home. So he's not even saying that it should be this color or this shape or this style. He's just saying the more you can put individual, unique things that are specific to you into your home, the more it's going to feel like it has an identity that represents you and doesn't look like every other gray and white house on the block. And these design phrases kind of remind me of sports, whereas like in football, you always hear like offense wins games and defense wins champions. And like people that know a lot about football will say things like that. They're not necessarily true, and no disrespect to people that know more about a game than I do. What they're probably saying is that there was too much emphasis at this point on these things, and there's sort of a underrepresented value by doing the opposite. So that's specific to a moment in time. It's almost like a market imbalance, whereas this stock is a good buy at this price at this moment. It doesn't mean that that company is always a great investment, because if the stock price goes up, it could be the opposite. So I think these things really need to be evaluated a little bit more specifically. The other thing that I think is that all of this kind of hints at is these things came at a time where something was shifting. And in the less is more case, it was the Industrial Revolution. We had the ability to mass manufacture it. Before the Industrial Revolution, a lot of people's furniture was DIY'd within at least the community, if not done by the individuals themselves. So everything was kind of random, handmade, probably various grades of craftsmanship. And manufacturing created a way to improve quality back then. Decades and decades of it, we reached a point of diminishing return, whereas probably the first few decades of industrialization, there was a mass improvement of the handmade or of the objects in people's homes or businesses and stuff like that. But at some point, we hit a point of diminishing returns where the goal of the industrial design process wasn't to make things better or more efficient. Most of those gains have been gobbled up. It was simply to try to substitute expensive materials for cheaper ones, eke out a few more cents out of every unit, refine, look at different design trends, copy the ones that are working, and everything starts to homogenize and blend together. And I think that's why videos like Hans's now are resonating so well, is that we've had so much less is more that we want less is more. Dieter Rams is another interesting design figure, and his phrase was always as little design as possible. And it can be a very useful phrase. I think when you look at what he designed, it was so specific to what kind of technology was available at that moment. And it also kind of shows that designers are sort of limited by the technology that they have access to. They don't always kind of transcend it. They can critique it, they can make an evaluation to go more retro or more futuristic, they can embrace the new stuff. But, I would say that when you look at his celebrated kind of stereo systems, they're incredible. I love them. Big inspiration to a lot of things that I think about design-wise. So no shade, but I would argue like the iPod is the much more less design or as little design as possible. Now, he didn't, operate at an era where that kind of digital technology existed. But I wouldn't say necessarily that the iPod was just superior design skill than what Dieter Rams was doing. He was not a technologist as much as he was sort of repackaging and recomposing with technology that was available through his manufacturing partners at Braun and such. And I think it shows that kind of new technology can lead to a new type of excellence and form factor that you can't do with just creative skills and an understanding of what's available at the moment. But that also doesn't mean that all technological evolution is going to result in a better finished product. We can isolate and separate out protein from like plants and stuff like that. It doesn't mean plant-based protein is going to be better for you than chicken or fish, right? So just because technology can create a new form factor in those things, it doesn't mean that it's always going to yield to a better product or a more desirable product. It just gives designers more options to compose with. But tell me why I'm wrong. If you think less is more is a universal truth, or any of these phrases have deep and continuous meaning regardless of the context, love to hear it. I kind of disagree, but I'm sure there's some good arguments out there. The other reason why I think this is important to talk about now, it's not because we're about to experience another industrial revolution, but it is plausible that we're about to experience a digital production revolution with AI. I know everyone talks about AI way too much, but I think it's worth noting. And so I like looking back at the Industrial Revolution, not to say that it's going to go the exact same way for this new kind of AI boom, but I think the comparisons, while they might not give us the ability to precisely predict what will happen, they can help us be less surprised by when stuff happens. So before mass manufacturing, most things were made locally or regionally. There was a local table maker, door maker, cabinet makers, and then people did a lot of stuff themselves. Things were handmade, some of them were beautiful, some of them were done with craftsmanship, some of them weren't. Kind of like local restaurants. There's great local restaurants, but not all local restaurants are good. There's some really terrible ones. Out here in the high desert, there's some great local places to eat, and there's some ones that are not as good as corporate franchises. It's just the reality. So there's probably a mix. And nothing was really standardized or consistent. I always used the example of Little House on the Prairie. And when you would hear them talk about food, man, they were so basic back then. Like, they would talk about manufactured white sugar as if it was the best thing in the world. They would talk about it like it was the best wine or the greatest caviar or the best baked good. And really, it was just because it was rare, and that level of refinement and processing was expensive, and they associate it with elevated and high taste. And so they really believed that refined white sugar was this amazing thing. And I bet you their refined white sugar was not as refined as our white sugar today. Whereas like you go to a coffee shop today and they serve you like a basic sort of Domino white sugar, you're going to look at them and be like, wow, you lose your hipster street cred right away. This is the worst, most generic, mass-produced, terrible for you things. I need some organic stevia, or at least like sugar in the raw, or something that feels a little more authentic. Brown sugar is not better than white sugar. It's just a different color. It's made in a different way with different levels of refinement. It's about taste. It is subjective. So I think that's really important to consider, is that particular context. It's about what was plentiful, what was seen as sort of high end and low end. It's not really about these like universal truths. Whereas now, something that's like handmade and regional, people will associate it as being a premium thing. Like handmade wood furniture is really expensive in America. It has an association with craft and taste. Whereas back then it was associated with being in the, these kind of like tenement apartments that were kind of, run down, or these small sort of podunk villages. So when industrial manufacturing arrived, it completely changed the equation. Now, how does that translate to today with like digital mass production? AI is going to use machine learning. And machine learning is going to be similar to machine logic. And there's a logic to manufacturing which causes sort of a normalization, right? If you're doing injection molded plastic, the molds need to have a certain draft. The screw holes have to have a certain little, collar around them. There starts to be this language that develops that's specific to the machines that we're invested in. So what happens is all design ideas start to go, as they get ready to go through manufacturing, the constraints of the machines that are producing them start to normalize the designs and make things more similar. That's why like the power tool companies, they all use different colors, and they have like different detailing on the molds, but they all look relatively similar. A few different features here and there, but the logic of how they're made is dictating more than the willfulness of the creative people that are making the aesthetic decisions for the tools themselves. And so like the ideas of less is more, they could really apply to this process, where it's kind of a great check and balance to make sure as you go from raw idea on paper or screen and into manufacturing, hey, maybe don't leave as many arbitrary things. Let the logic of the tools that are manufacturing it sort of be dominant. And that was really helpful to go from handmade things to machine-made things. But at some point, there wasn't that much of the handmade residue left over creatively. And that advice became less and less potent. Now, industrial design did a lot of good things. It made design in some ways a lot more accessible. One person could reach millions of consumers. You think of like the classic plastic chair. That chair was designed by one person, and it's reached probably millions, if not hundreds of millions of people have sat in that chair. That was not possible in that way. The same way social media and the digital revolution has allowed sort of one person to kind of speak to many people through social media things. There's tons of YouTubers out there that have reached hundreds of millions of people. With AI and its generative abilities, I think the limitation is going to be the interface. Right now, everyone's entering prompts or sort of speaking to them. And the input then is a combination of words. And so the models will evolve, and that's why it'll feel like that kind of type of design or generative ability is evolving and creating. But as long as the interface is just words to that, there'll be this normalization and this kind of flattening out. And so what I think that does, it creates an opportunity to kind of, again, be a little bit contradictory or a little bit rebellious, and being weird for the sake of being weird is probably going to be a thing. Like being weird in a way that a computer wouldn't think of will probably start to pop up. So I see this going a couple ways. You'll see some things that are just trying hard to be weird to get attention, and when everything kind of is sleek and conventionally well designed in terms of like what good design was thought of like 10 years ago. So you'll stand out by being incredibly garish and proving that you as a human think in a contradictory way to the computer. On the other hand, things that computers can't do, like handcrafted stuff, will also become really valuable. So like the subtle texture of hand carving, the subtle textures in sort of hand-formed pottery, all these things will become valuable. And then on the non-subtle side, it'll be sort of proving with sort of bold statements or counterintuitive choices that you don't think like an LLM, you think like a unique and weird human being. So we're going to get the weird and garish on one side, and we're going to get the kind of sublime and subtle handcrafted stuff on the other. And both of those kind of areas should thrive as we get more and more people just sort of typing in basic words and getting basic stuff out of the generative models. All right, Shane, overrated, underrated, what do we got?
Let's hit it. Corded tools.
Corded tools are great, particularly for tools that you're going to use for a long period of time. So I like corded orbital sanders, corded belt sanders in particular. Now, I don't use a lot of corded angle grinders, but I think that's another great option for a corded tool. The worst corded tool would be a corded drill. One, the drill doesn't use that much energy. So I'd say my top two corded versus non-corded would be handheld belt sander and angle grinder. Both of those make a lot of sense to be corded.
Bars.
Bars are interesting. I don't go to too many bars anymore by themselves. My favorite bars these days are all really good hotel lobby bars. I just feel like there's less crowded, there's better sort of places for conversation. When I was in Boston, my favorite bar was the Bristol Lounge at the Four Seasons. There was always like really good seating. You could get a snack if you were hungry. The drinks were sort of classic, but you weren't like kind of elbow to elbow having beer spilled on you.
Vans.
I think Vans are the most cost-effective shoe that's had the most stylistic persistence over the last 2 decades. So what do I mean by that? Well, Vans are really inexpensive because it's just like a simple, probably like vinyl outer, some sort of rubber and cloth. But I think what's most importantly is that you could have worn Vans, 30 years ago, and they would be like a perfectly acceptable shoe type if you're in high school. And I'm sure there's kids in high school that wear Vans today. Whereas I think there's very few silhouettes that have had that kind of longevity. They're almost like, in a way, like their own thing, like Birkenstocks or something like that.
Networking events.
Networking is important. Things titled networking events is kind of, it's like labeling something that's purposefully kind of intangible and trying to make it very explicit. It's like friendship hangout event. Look, spending time with your friends is really important and it's awesome. Hanging out with peers in an industry is important and it's also beneficial and fun. So it's great, but when it gets labeled really explicitly, what it tends to do is attract and draw people that maybe are a little too transactional in their intent and interest, and that can make it awkward, and then that can kind of scare away some of the people that are most worth knowing. I think better than quote unquote going to networking events is go to events period and be interesting enough to where people are curious about what you do and charismatic enough where people want to work with you. Substack seems like a great platform. I know people that use it and they do well on it. So I like the option that it gives to particularly writers. I think I've subscribed to a few people on Substack, but I hardly ever check it. It's like Substack and Patreon. I really like that they exist, but to be honest, like they're not in like the main apps that I check. It's kind of like blogs. There's blogs that I used to really like, but I don't go to individual websites really anymore.
Wearing the same thing every day.
So the idea behind wearing it the same thing every day is that it reduces decision fatigue because you have the uniforms and you kind of force your choice. That's plausible. But you can do the same thing. It doesn't have to be quite so regimented. And picking one uniform may not be appropriate for every situation. So there could be a downside. So maybe you save 10 calories worth of thinking in the morning by picking the black shirt and the black pants. But if later on you're sweating your ass off because like it's all black and that was what you have and it's 100 degrees outside and you should be wearing shorts and a white t-shirt, I don't know. Maybe that's not inefficient. If you're uncomfortable later, that seems like it would have a bigger impact. I think the better thing would just be have things that are all practical and that aren't too of the moment, and then just kind of be comfortable with whatever you grab that makes sense at the time. So if the question is reducing decision fatigue, just deprioritize the stakes of making the wrong decision. So I think a narrowed focus would work just as well as wearing the exact same thing every day.
The being nice versus honest argument.
I don't think there is an argument about being nice or being honest. There's appropriate behavior for different circumstances. It's debatable what is appropriate and what isn't. It's a vague area that's totally subjective and contextually dependent. So debating things without context is often a waste of time. This is better than this. Well, it depends on when, right? It's like saying, what's a better tool? Well, what are you trying to build? It's kind of silly to be like, I'm not nice, I'm just honest. Who cares? Were you effective in that particular moment, regardless of whether you were trying to be nice or honest? Focus on that.
The NDA.
I don't know, I'm not a lawyer, but there's a lot of times when I get asked to sign NDAs that just seem like a waste of time. Like the amount of companies that send an NDA before we send you this offer for this brand deal. So I'm gonna go try to start a robotic pool cleaning company, because I saw information about your pool cleaning robot 2 months before the rest of the world did. It's like, come on. Okay, sure. We can, if you're happy paying for that DocuSign subscription and littering the world with more PDFs with my signature on it, go right ahead. But there's so many NDAs about silly things that no one cares about. But this comes from what I would call, on the entrepreneurial side, product vanity. People work really hard to create something, and it's so important to them. They lose sight that the rest of the world doesn't care, right? They think everyone's going to take our idea and try to steal it and copy it. You would be so lucky if people cared enough about your product to try to steal and copy it. So I get it. It's good practice. There's a reason why they're there, but definitely overused.
The IKEA kitchen.
IKEA makes great stuff, and you can do nice functional designs with their things. So if that's your price point and you like the way it looks, the other nice thing is you can see it in person. Their showrooms are amazing. You can open all the cabinets, you can make the substitutions, you can see how it looks with other IKEA plates and dishes and all that kind of stuff. So in terms of all the available kind of off-the-shelf kitchen options, I would say IKEA is right up there. Now, especially if you were to compare it to Home Depot or Lowe's, they also have some little showrooms and stuff like that, but it relies, I think, a little bit more on samples. They don't have as many kind of fully set up kitchens. The fact that you could also kind of pair it with the dining table and those kind of furniture components, I think it's a great option, particularly because you can see them in person before you shop and buy.
Museums.
Museum's a broad category, right? I think of museum I think of theater. Well, yeah, there's some plays that are amazing, and there's some plays that I think are incredibly boring and uninteresting. So there's some times where I think galleries are doing more interesting things than museums, and there's some museums that are incredible. I would say the top tier of museums is really special. If you're in DC for the first time, go check out the Smithsonian's. If you're in New York, go to the MoMA, go to the Guggenheim. If you're in LA, go to LACMA, go to the Broad, go to Dataland. There's some the top tier is excellent. When it starts to get into the weird niche ones, it depends, right? The historical museums, I don't find as interesting, right? Just seeing the old antiquities behind glass cases, I find that less inspiring, but I'm not the biggest sort of history buff. I would say the exception to that was the Egyptian Museum in Tahrir in Cairo. That was pretty cool just because the things were so big and they weren't behind glass cases. There was giant statues of a pharaoh that you could just walk right up to. So I think scale and presentation really matters, but in general, I like the top tier museums in the major cities. Oh, one other one I would add to, if you're ever in Boston, the Isabel Gardner Museum, I think, is a really great experience because it was just this weird, interesting lady's eclectic home and art collection, kind of like an East Coast version of Hearst Castle, which is another one I think we're seeing.
Horror movies.
I mean, I think horror movies are kind of like super hot sauces, right? Like it's this need to feel some sort of sensation and beyond the point of like taste. Now, some hot sauces are really thoughtfully composed and actually add to the taste experience of the food. Other ones are just trying to add hotness for hotness sakes, where there's like the most atomic death wish hot sauce. You put that on something, you're not going to taste anything, you're just getting a sensation in your otherwise dull and drab life. I think that's what like the movies like Saw are like. Now, there are some, I think the Scream movies were really creative. I haven't seen Obsession, but I've heard really good things about it. I think horror can be done in a really creative and tasteful way where it's like there's a relatable things where all can be fearful of different moments and things. And that as like a type of spiciness, I think is really intriguing. But when it's just trying to create hotness on the Scoville scale for its own sake, no, that's lame.
Last one, the pellet grill.
Pellet grills are underrated. They're excellent. Now, they're not great for like cooking like a ribeye or a New York strip steak. I would prefer using a cast iron pan on the stove. They are amazing for the thicker cuts of meat. So you have like a really thick tomahawk ribeye, tri-tip, which is what we're always doing. Then I think it's amazing, even for things like chicken breasts or chicken thighs, because it's more like an oven, but you still have the flavor of a grill from the wood pellets. You can control the temperature a lot more and you have a lot more predictability. You should probably use a thermometer if you're a real aficionado and grill master. I don't. I just know the cuts of meats that I always cook, and so I have it down to this many minutes at this temperature on this side, and that just keeps it real simple and foolproof for me. Awesome. Thanks for watching Make a Ranch. Be sure to put your questions and topic ideas in the comments below, and we'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.